All right, YouTube, we're back with another mock draft, but this time we're not doing our 7 round team by team mocks. We're just doing the first round. And as we go through these 32 picks, make sure you drop your comments below. If you have questions, thoughts, let me know what you guys are thinking. Number one, we've got the New York Giants, and it's clear at this point that quarterback is going to be the top need. Dable and this crew was looking for their quarterback last year when they were wanting to try to get up and maybe get a Drake May type player, and they stayed pat, got Malik Neighbors, which is a great pick. He is going to be a great receiver for whoever they pick. My gut here tells me they take somebody who, if you're thinking about a Drake May type character, it's a player who's had plenty of college experience, lots of reps. So that takes out some of those guys that maybe haven't played nearly as many games. So it really does kind of take me to probably two of the top players. It should be Sanders or Cam Ward. I'm going Cam Ward because he's still my QB1 in this draft class. I think he can do everything that they're looking for him to do. And it really does make a lot of sense for the fit and the scheme and what they're doing as a team and how he plays. I mean, if you looked at the short profile I did of him, he does a lot of the same types of things. He's got the big arm, can thread the needle really well and do a lot of what Drake May could do. So I think that's a good fit for New York. On to pick 2, we got the Las Vegas Raiders. We know they're looking quarterback. There have been rumors about Shedeur Sanders. He's probably the second pick in this draft. It would not surprise me if Vegas is sitting here with the number 2 pick because they need quarterback. Clearly, it didn't work with Minshew Mania and Aiden O'Connell and everything else that they've been trotting out. Desmond Ritter, any of the other players that they got on the roster. It's just not it. They need their guy. So they're going to grab Shedeur Sanders. New England's already got their quarterback. Drake May is it. I mean, he looks good, has been doing very well. So at this point, you're going to look for weapons. You're going to look for, he could easily use a wide receiver 1. They could use some offensive line help. Travis Hunter, the Heisman, sitting here. I don't know how you say no to him because you can use him in either position. You could use him as a DB. They could probably play him more on the offensive side, and he would be perfectly fine. So I'm making this pick here and going Travis Hunter because he's the best player. And for New England, they need the best players. They do also need offensive line help for sure, but that's for another round. Pick 4, Jacksonville. At this point, Jacksonville's a team that needs defensive help, I think, more than anything. They're probably going to look, more to trenches. We know they spent a lot on the offensive line in recent memory. So I'm going to give Mason Graham here, give him a really strong interior. Carolina at pick 5 is really interesting. If you've followed my mock drafts for Carolina, my team by team 7 round over on draftcountdown.com, I kind of look 2 directions with them: the Bryce Young direction and the non-Bryce Young direction. Basically, are they going to go get their quarterback in the future, or do they already have him? I think they need to keep trying to kind of roll with Bryce Young. I think he's got the intangibles you look for. And you saw a lot of this year's been tough for him. He got benched, was brought back in, hasn't had great games, but has had some very productive games. It's shown you that he could be that guy. This team needs a lot of things. They could use some defense, but Ted McMillan's sitting here on the board. They need a wide receiver 1. They need that true number 1 receiver, and Ted is it. I mean, he's an elite playmaker, a big physical receiver, and can kind of do it all. And Bryce needs a guy like that he can just kind of throw it up to and trust that he's going to go get the ball. Pick 6 here, Tennessee Titans, has kind of been one of those situations where I've looked at them multiple ways throughout the season. At times I thought Will Levis could be the guy. At times I thought that Will Levis isn't going to be the guy. And even this week, he got pulled out again for Mason Rudolph. I don't necessarily know that I love them sticking with him long term. At this point, you've now lost 2 of the top quarterbacks in the class, but Jalen Milroe's sitting there. So if Tennessee thinks that they could build around Milroe and use him to propel them to the next level, they could do that. This team could use some defensive line help. They could use some offensive line help. They could use a lot of different things. I'm not going to jump at an edge rusher here. I'm going to go as though they're going to take a quarterback, and I'm going to go with Jalen Milroe. I think he's got a lot of upside and a lot of potential, and I think this team really needs to nail that quarterback and get that right fit, and I think Jalen Milroe can do that for him. Pick 7, Cleveland needs a quarterback, but they're going to continue to run it back with Deshaun Watson and hope that they can stuff that square peg into a round hole. With that being said, I'm going to look elsewhere. This team could use a few different things. And with as much as I think that they could use defensive line, edge rusher, cornerback, they're going to need some offensive line help. I think they need a tackle. Ifedi's not really the long-term play here. So I'm going to look at the tackle class, and because we are at the point where they can take the pick of the mill, you got to go with your top guy. For me, I'm going Calvin Banks here from Texas. I think he's big, physical. He's a smart player. He's done it at a high level for a little while now, and I think he really can help elevate them to the next level. I like the fit here. But if you said Will Campbell, it wouldn't surprise me. I think Ursary is probably a mid to late first. I don't imagine anybody in the top 10 taking him at this point, but yeah, I could be wrong. At the Jets here at pick 8, they need quarterback help. Aaron Rodgers ain't it. I don't imagine he's coming back. And as much as I like Jordan Travis, I don't really think he's probably the guy either. When you look at what's there, this really depends on what happens with Ewers, what's going to happen when this season's over for him. Beck has been up and down. Dart's continuing to climb the board, but I really don't see him as a top 10 pick. Riley Leonard, it'll be interesting to see how he continues to project as they move forward, because Notre Dame's in the playoff. Do they go deep into the playoff? Maybe that propels him into that conversation. Gabriel, has been a high-powered offensive leader this year. For me, it's kind of a, Ewers, Beck, Dart are kind of those guys sitting there, which I don't love any of those players there. I think they could easily look at a different position, but you go best available. I think at this point, the best player on the board, even though may not be an offensive line or defensive line, is Will Johnson from Michigan. You put him across from Sauce Gardner. I mean, you pick your poison. Who's going to pick six you? Because both of those are elite cornerbacks, and they could use a guy on the right side. I mean, they really could. And Johnson brings an elite athletic profile. He's got some ball skills. We saw him be willing to go in and get his nose in there and be a strong tackler. It's one of those players where, it's kind of a tough spot for them because they could look quarterback. I just don't know that I love the quarterbacks that are there at this point. The top 3 are gone, so you're kind of in a weird spot where maybe they try to get a veteran. Maybe they try to reunite with a Sam Darnold or a Justin Fields or somebody like that and see what happens. In the end, you got to go get your guy. And even though they've got Sauce Gardner, I think Will Johnson would be huge across from him, and that would just be a couple of lockdown corners that make things really interesting in that division. Pick 9, we got Chicago Bears. They're a team that's going to be in flux. I think they could still continue to look for offensive line help. Their defense has been strong. Their defense has been what's kept them in games this year. So I'm going to take Will Campbell here from LSU. Just take the best offensive lineman and you put your best 5 out there. And you pick 10, New Orleans. They need a little bit of everything. I don't think Derek Carr is the long-term fit for them. I don't think he's really much more than kind of a stopgap guy, if that. At this point, they're going to look for a lot of different things. They have some pieces on that defense, but they've made a lot of moves to get some draft capital and to try to help them rebuild. Again, I don't know that I love Ewers or Beck or Dart in any of these positions. Most of those guys I think are kind of mid to late, if not. So you kind of look and you take best available. For me, when you're looking up and down the board at what's here for them, I think they could go a couple different directions, depending on how you feel about the pieces that are here. I'm going to go Michael Williams because he is my top edge rusher, and to get to top edge rusher at this point at pick 10, I think is kind of a no-brainer. They've got some aging players on that defensive side. You got to continue to infuse some talent. They got Brian Bresee, who is, I think, a really nice piece in the middle. You get some edge help for him. I think that really begins to set the tone there for that defensive line. With Miami pick 11, it's kind of one of those, do you believe in Tua or don't? If you don't, you start to think, okay, where can they draft a quarterback? This is a team that I think needs more than just a quarterback. They've got some elite pieces, but they still need some help. I know they took Chop Robinson last year in the first round, but the thing I say all the time is you can't have enough guys to protect your quarterback, and you can't have enough guys to attack your quarterback. With Abdul Carter sitting there on the board, I think he is probably a top 15 piece in this draft class, and really any of these next few teams would probably be excited to get him, give them to Miami. If you told me offensive line there, I would probably agree with you because they could use really anything offensive line. I don't necessarily think they have 5 high caliber starting offensive linemen. I think they have a couple of good pieces, and I think they have a couple of aging vets. So with that being said, give me an edge rusher that you can kind of use as a chess piece there, and Abdul Carter. And then we move on to Indianapolis, who is a team that's in transition still. They're still trying to figure out their identity. I think Anthony Richardson's still going to need some more actual game reps to continue to develop. And I think it's going to be more than another season. I think they're still going to be one of those fringe AFC South teams that could push for winning their division every year. but at the same time could be, 8-9 or 9-8 for the next year or so. So continue to build and give yourself the best players available. They've got a solid offensive line. Their defensive line is beginning to age. I think their linebackers are beginning to age. There's just some different things here that they could look for. I'm going to flip the script. I haven't really been picking tight end for them, but I'm going to take Colston Loveland here for them because I think that's the one thing that they really do need. I know Granson's done a pretty good job being a safety net, but they really do need a sure-handed guy that's in the middle. They've tried to use Pittman and Pierce and Jones, and they all do a good job at what they do, but they really do need a true tight end one to help Anthony Richardson out. What they say about a young quarterback, a tight end's his best friend, and I don't think they've necessarily had an elite tight end to really help him. That's what Colston Loveland is. All right, Cincinnati, they need defensive line help. They could use edge rushers. They could do those types of things, but I'm going again. I'm Kenneth Grant here. They need a guy in the middle that can be a disruptive force. That's just it. I mean, Kenneth Grant is a space eater. He's a powerful guy. He's got good hands. He can shed blocks. I mean, he really can do it all. And if Mason Graham wasn't on that Michigan defensive line currently, I think you would have that conversation that Grant is, DT1 in the class, but Mason Graham is just that good. Dallas here, I've kind of been picking them the same guy over and over again, and maybe it's because I'm a Lions guy that I'm not afraid to take a running back in the first round, but Dallas has just looked bad without a running game. I mean, they really do need that running game to set up what they do as a passing team. So they got to go get the best, and Ashton Jeanty is it. I mean, he's just an elite ball carrier that really does give them something they really haven't had in a couple seasons, even with when they were doing the Tony Pollard, Ezekiel Elliott there the last couple of years. I mean, Jeanty's better than both of them together. I mean, it's just a no-brainer here. San Francisco is a team that, decimated with injuries. Running back is something that they could have certainly looked at as well. I think they'll definitely be looking to draft one. Christian McCaffrey's getting, just continuing to get dinged up. I think they've got a couple of running backs they can use, but I don't think they look to do that immediately. They're going to continue to look for receiver help. I know they took Ricky Pearsall last year with their first, but I think they still need some receiver help. But we need to help that offensive line. Trent Williams clearly is not getting any younger and dealt with injuries. They took Pooney in the third round last year, and he's been a good piece for them, but I think they still need another. I think that's where you start to really consider Urshery. I don't necessarily think you look at an interior guy, but, Urshery or Williams, and then maybe even, probably not Wyatt Millum. I'm just going to take Urshery here and just call it like it is. I think he's a really strong outside tackle. I think he can do what they're looking for him to do. Big, strong, physical guy. Really kind of fits what they are as a team, so I think he's a really good fit for them. Then we move on to Atlanta, who has already got their quarterback and their quarterback of the future. They could use some offensive line help as well because their offensive line not getting younger. They took some defensive pieces last year. They've got a few pieces there that I think are intriguing as young players. And when you look at kind of what's here on the board, you've got receivers, you've got safeties, you've got some edge help. Nick Scorton, I think, would be a really interesting piece here. Same with Jalen Walker, Siobhan Revel. I mean, there really isn't necessarily a bad direction to go for this team because they went defense early last year, and really focused on that. I'm going to look to see what offensive weapons are here, but at this point, because really your wide receivers are Mecca, Buka, and Burden, I think those are the two guys that I feel comfortable taking in the mid-first round. I think I'm going to look elsewhere. I think I'm going to go with Jalen Walker because I think you need a really elite linebacker in this defensive scheme, and I think you've got some good ones. Anderson's been hurt, but I don't necessarily know that you have a guy of Walker's caliber. We're going to take him here and really help elevate that defense. Arizona is up at 17, and they could look in a few different directions. I'm going to look at corner here, though. I think this would be the time where you start to see some of these top corners come off that aren't, Travis Hunter and Will Johnson. Depending on what they're looking for, you really could make the case that Revel or Morrison is going to be the guy. All right, pick 18. We're looking at the Seattle Seahawks. And Seattle's an interesting team. I think they're a team that could really go in a multitude of directions. For me, at this point, I'm going to take my top player on my board, and that's going to be Nick Skelton. It's hard not to think that they could continue to use edge rushers. When you watch, especially like when you watch the Green Bay game, you need to be able to attack in a variety of different ways. And I think Mike McDonald will be able to deploy a player like this in a way that can really use him to kind of set the tone for that defense. They've built some things and they've got some pieces there that are really solid. A guy like this can really put them over the top and really help elevate that defense, which is something that I think they're going to need to do, especially in the division they're in. It's that's a good division. It's just had a rash of injuries this year. Next up, we got the LA Chargers at 19. I know they went McConkey early last year. They're a team that is set at quarterback clearly with Herbert. They could use, they've used picks early on offensive line help recently. They could use some defensive line help, and they're kind of in a weird spot because we've seen a lot of the top pieces go off the board already. A lot of the top pieces that could fit for them, whether it's edge rushers, defensive line, whether it's offensive line. You could look at a receiver here. Obviously, they like or have been developing Quentin Johnston. McConkey's played well when given the opportunity. They have Josh Palmer. I think DJ Shark is still even there. They could use a tight end, but obviously Colson Loveland's off the board at this point. I'm going to go with Malachi Starks just because they can use another DB. At this point, they're a team that's dealt with injuries, but they're starting safeties right now that aren't Derwin James. They're just not elite. They're fine, but Malachi Starks gives them a player that just has a different speed to his game. He's just been really good throughout his collegiate career, and I think he really helps them out in a variety of ways in the secondary with something that they need desperately. All right, next up, Tampa Bay, another team that's dealt with injuries. Receivers have been hurt off and on all year. I think especially with the age of them, I would definitely consider receivers at this point. They've normally looked for the big guys. When you think of Evans and obviously Godwin, they've taken some other pieces recently that I think might make them consider looking elsewhere and not looking directly at receiver in the first round. They could look in other directions. They have tight end set. They've got pretty solid pieces there along the defensive line. So this would be about the time where I start considering a guy like Benjamin Morrison. Maybe they look at offensive line if they needed some. I'm going to just say Morrison. I think he gives them a really nice corner that could be a starter for them for a long time. I know after they moved on from Carlton Davis, they've done some things to try to mix it up there in the secondary, and I'm not super set and satisfied with what they've got. So adding Gallic Morrison, I think, would be an interesting pick there for them. And it wouldn't surprise me if they went receiver. If you told me they went Burden or Emeka Egbuka, those are two perfectly suitable mid to late first round receivers that I wouldn't be surprised if they jumped on. Up next, we got the Rams, another team that's fighting for a playoff spot, and I think they have a good shot at making it. They've been getting healthy at the right time and playing good football. It would not surprise me the least if they took a receiver either, even though they've got Cooper Kupp, they've got Puka, they've got Whittington, Robinson. It wouldn't surprise me if they took a receiver. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to give them Emeka Egbuka just to give them another weapon because I think Stafford comes back for another year. So they'll continue to try to build around him. At this point, if you told me they took a interior defensive lineman, I probably would be surprised. For me, it's probably wide receiver or offensive line are kind of the two positions I've been pinpointing for them. Maybe even defensive back, probably a corner. But when you look at what's here on the board, there's not really a first round caliber corner here. I think there's some guys that you could take later that could develop into startable players for you. So, all right, next up, pick 22, Washington, a very surprised team, but it's played well. Jaden Daniels has really been the guy for them and really worked out well. You could really see this team look at the edge rushers. Again, this time would be a perfect time for them to go target one of them, especially when you've got, easily probably four that you could consider first round type talents in Pierce, Jackson, Tuimalu, and Sawyer. Here I'm going to go with the guy that probably is still my tops of these. Although Tuimalu is probably right there with him, but James Pierce Jr., I think we haven't seen the best of him yet. I think there's still plenty of room for him to grow, and he's got some really impressive tools that I think a team like Washington and with what they do on defense could use him and be really productive. All right, pick 23, we've got the Denver Broncos, currently a playoff team. They're playing some of their best ball at this point. They've got their quarterback. They've got their receivers locked up. Strong, solid tight ends. They've got a little bit of everything. They really are in a spot where you feel like they're moving in the right direction. In my mind, you're probably looking offensive line or defensive line. And at that point, you're looking at kind of what's best available. I'm going Walter Nolan. I think he can give you a variety of different things along the defensive front. Can fit it interior or play on the outside to some degree, especially with how Sean Payton's defensive scheme runs. So I think Nolan is a first round defensive lineman, probably somewhere in the 20 to 30 range, maybe 31 or 32, but probably in the 20 to 30 range for sure. All right, next up, Baltimore Ravens. Really any of these teams from 24 on are in consideration for a Super Bowl contender, right? They're all really high quality, high caliber teams that I think Houston's the only one that's been having an up and down season, but the rest of these teams have been strong. Baltimore, has really got everything. I mean, it's kind of a glutton of riches, so they'll take best available and be perfectly satisfied. They don't need receivers. They got a bunch of those. They don't need tight ends. They got some of those. You know, you could see them look at defensive line. You could see them look at offensive line. We know that they like their Alabama players. We know that they like a little bit of everything. So at this point, it's kind of like, who's the best available? This may be the crazy pick of the draft for me so far, but Deion Walker from Kentucky, I think, is a really a fun pick to try to fit into the first round. You know, big, massive human being, was 6'5", 6'6", 340, 345 range, but he's got size, speed, burst, power. I mean, kind of has it all. And although Baltimore isn't in need of any one thing, like there's not a huge glaring need for this team, they just strike me as a team that fits with what Walker is and who he is as a player. Pick 25, Houston Texans. So this is a team that dealt with some injuries as well. You know, they've had wide receivers get hurt. They could use some defensive line help. They could use some secondary help, but I know that some guys have been hurt, you know, so it's one of those things where I think they're in a spot where you just take best available and you kind of go from there. Wouldn't surprise me if they targeted offensive line. You know, where you look at what's kind of sitting here on the board, they've got some pieces here. They've got, if you're looking for interior, you got Booker, you got you got Williams, you got Simmons. You're looking on the interior, you've got a couple guys. If you're looking on the outside, you've got, you know, I would say probably these two are definitely considered first round type players. We're going to go grab Luther Burden. You don't let the best available wide receiver sit on the board any longer. You might as well get them because they could use that help. I mean, they got Nico, they got Stephon, they got Tank Dell, you know, but we've seen plenty of injuries with all those guys. So why not go get another elite wide receiver, especially with Diggs getting not getting any younger. All right, Pittsburgh Steelers on the board at 26. They could use a receiver too. You know, I know they've got Pickens and they traded for Mike Williams and Calvin Austin, but you know, I think they still need a receiver. I think you're seeing what you see on the board is you see a lot of things that they don't necessarily need. So this would be the prime time to see some of those teams wanting to jump up to maybe acquire somebody that they love, whether there's a quarterback or something of that nature. If you look at the receivers that are on the board, I think Isaiah Bond would definitely be a guy that I would say, you know, we're just going to take him. We're going to give him Isaiah Bond. They need receiver help. You know, I don't think that they have really truly elite pieces outside of George Pickens. I think Austin is a really nice piece. Next up is Green Bay Packers, and they're a team that they're sitting at 9-10 wins, and they're still third in their division, which is crazy to me to think about. So you know that they're a solid team when you're getting up to the double-digit win totals, especially with the season they've had. You know, Jordan Love's dealt with injury. You know, he's continuing to build rapport with a receiving core that's been hurt, been up and down. What's sitting here on the board? I think most likely that they look at offensive line if they stay here, unless they trade up or trade down. So I'm just going to sit here on the offensive line, and I'm going to take Cameron Williams from Texas. I think he's probably my favorite of the three that are still sitting there on the board. And he's a guy that they could use in a couple different spots. You know, I think it pushes competition on the tackles. If they want to try to move him inside, you can probably do that as well. All right, next up, pick 28, we got the Minnesota Vikings, a team that is picking here for a reason. They played well all year, even with their first-round quarterback being on IR. Sam Darnold's played well. Will they, won't they conversation is for another time, but what we're here to do is we're here to pick for them. What are they going to do at pick 28? Well, they go a variety of directions. I think they're feeling comfortable with their offensive line, so they probably don't look there. Tight end, they've got at least two solid ones in Oliver and Hawkinson. They've obviously got two elite wide receivers with some okay depth. Could use some help there, but obviously, as we've seen, there's been a run, and they're not drafting any of these guys anytime soon. Those are day two guys, some of those at best. So what we're looking here is probably defense. You know, when you look at what's on the defense, we look at defensive line. Derek Harmon, they could use really any of these pieces here. You could look at the edge rushers, you know, with Tuamalu, Sawyer, and Jackson here. I think any of those guys would be a consideration. They could use some help in the secondary. You know, they've got Gilmore and guys that they've tried to run out there, and I think that they're going to need to take some corners. When you look at what's out here, you know, there really isn't an elite piece, so it's going to look like we're trying to reach. So we're just going to go back to the edge rushers, and we're going to grab Landon Jackson from Arkansas. I think what you'll see with Minnesota is they're going to look to kind of what's the best available piece, and most likely on the defensive side. Now, trying to nail down which position yet, I'm still working through, but it wouldn't surprise me if they looked to the secondary if there was a guy there that they loved. But right now, there just isn't. I mean, we've seen all the high-end pieces go, so we're going to look at the next best thing. Always need edge rushers. Next up, the Buffalo Bills at 29. But the tough thing is these last 4 teams are all in that same situation. You know, Detroit is kind of running on their last legs at this point. They're hurting something fierce. But the other 3 teams are all healthy and grinding their way towards the Super Bowl. Obviously, Kansas City just dealt with the Mahomes injury, but we're on to Buffalo. So what is Buffalo going to do at 29? We know they took receiver last year. They really could go in a variety of directions. They've got their tight ends. They've got a couple in Kincaid and Knox. Depending on what happens with Knox, at least got Kincaid. You know, they could look to defensive line help. You know, they've got Ed Oliver. They've got some edge rushers. It wouldn't surprise me if they looked at in the linebacking core, just because of Matt Milano not getting any younger. You know, we've got a couple guys here. Stutzman, Perkins, and Campbell, I really like. Barrett Carter's another guy I like. These are, but I don't necessarily see any of these guys as first-round picks. Even Perkins, who I thought is without the injury, is the best linebacker in this draft class. I still don't see him as a first-round pick. So we're looking at edge rushers. You've got Tuamalo, Jack Sawyer. Those are guys that I think you see more as actual defensive line edge rushers as opposed to somebody who could stand up as a linebacker. So really you come back to, okay, this is probably a team that's trading out of this pick. Whether they trade up to get a guy they love or trade out for the sake of this, we're not trading out. So we're just going to go, we're going to draft some offensive line help. You know, obviously guys on the outside will probably be more intriguing at this point, you know, than an interior guy, because you can always flex them inside if need be, potentially. So I'm going to go Josh Simmons here from Ohio State. I think they could go really any direction on the offensive line, and it wouldn't surprise me, interior or on the outside. Most likely, I think they probably target someone in the back 7 in the first round if they're picking here in the spring. So linebackers or corners, but the way that this draft board has fallen out, we're kind of sitting here. So we're going with what's best available in positions of needs, things like that. Because I'll be honest, I don't see Tyler Warren as a top 20 pick. I like the tight end. I don't necessarily know that we're going to see him taken in the first round in this upcoming draft. I think he's probably an early day 2 pick, most likely, but I could be wrong there. All right, pick 30, Philadelphia. This is another team that would not surprise me if they went defensive back. They went Quinyon Mitchell last year, and I love that pick. Wouldn't surprise me if they grabbed another guy. Probably going to have to look to day 2 for that. This is another team that could use some offensive line help. I think this would be a perfect time for you to see somebody like a Wyatt Millum. I think he's a really nice piece here. Evan Worry wouldn't be a surprising pick here. I think they could use a player like him. Tuamalo is going to get picked in 2 picks. I'm almost 100% sure, just because in 1 pick, I'm pretty sure I'm taking him for Detroit, just because that's who I've been mocking to Detroit. Barron, Jack Sawyer. Oh, that's a tough one. I don't necessarily love taking linebacker here. I really, and some of these guys I expect to be first rounders, so it's hard for me to sit here and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna take Millum, Wyatt Millum from West Virginia, guy who's not too far away from there. I think he could certainly push for first round consideration, depending on how many guys go in the first and the offensive line side of things. They are starting to get older on their offensive line, so I think they need some reinforcements. I think Millum, I really think Millum, Simmons, Williams, these would have all been guys that would have been in play for Philadelphia. Next up, Detroit at pick 31, hopefully pick 32 if they can get some guys back healthy. They have dealt with a crazy amount of injuries this year, especially on the defensive side. I mean, they've lost almost half their starters on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to potentially get some back for the playoffs, which is great because they're a playoff team already. So if they can get Anzalone back, if they can get, Rakestraw back, if they can get, Iffy Melifonwu back, I mean, I think they're going to be in a really good spot moving into the playoffs. It would be great if they could get Aiden back, but that's really a long shot. It's going to be a tough road for them. So I think what they'll do in the spring is they'll look to bring in Tuamalo is a guy I've mocked them a few times now. I think if you look at my 7-round mock, I think that's the same player I picked here. I really love the motor on this kid. I love the determination and the Detroit word of grit. This guy's got it in spades. You put him across from Aiden, or you put him as a situational pass rusher, depending on what happens with Za'Darius. He's learning from some elite players at the position, and I think that really bodes well for him. Then rounding it out at pick 32, this team went receiver last year early. It's one of those things where Kansas City is just going to do whatever they feel like, and it's going to go well because they're a well-coached team. Their front office does a good job. I think they go Derek Harmon here. I think you could see them grabbing some defensive line help just because some of their guys are getting older. I think what's going to happen here is you're going to see them look to just kind of grab best defensive player available. And at this point, Harmon, I think, would give them a guy that they could flex around and do some different things with. We'll see what happens come the spring. A lot's going to change, especially we've got free agency, we've got the combine, and there's guys here that didn't go in the first round that I've tried to get into the first round. So you guys let me know in the comments below. What do you think? What's going on for your team in the first round in the 2025 NFL draft? And I'll see you later.